This presentation covers night operations specific to the T-6. Included is Phase 2 syllabus requirements, logging of nighttime, required personal equipment, use of aircraft lighting, spatial disorientation and visual illusions, pattern and approach procedures, and night restrictions. The Phase 2 UPT syllabus has several night requirements. Prior to a student's first night flight, the student will be briefed on problems associated with night flying. Additionally, an instructor pilot will accomplish a spatial disorientation demonstration in the aircraft. The minimum night hours required for all students to complete Phase 2 is 7, with at least an hour and a half in the aircraft. All students must accomplish a minimum of 2 night landings, 4 are desired, in the N4000 or N4100 block. The last night landing must be to a fair grade level. Nighttime and night landings must occur between evening civil twilight and morning civil twilight, as published in the American Air Almanac. AFI 11-401, titled Aviation Management, governs the logging of flight time. According to 11401, night is defined as the portion of primary, secondary, instructor, or evaluator flight time logged between the end of evening civil twilight and the beginning of morning civil twilight, as published in the American Air Almanac. 11401 states primary instrument time can be logged anytime the external conditions require that the aircraft attitude be maintained primarily by reference to the flight instruments. At night, log primary instrument time in the 781 flight record since there is no discernible horizon. The 11401 AETC supplement states that for aircrew members to receive credit for flying currencies associated with flight condition time, the member must log at least 0.1 hours of corresponding flight condition time. For example, to log a night landing, you must log at least 0.1 hours of night time. AFI 11-202 Volume 3 states student training and continuation training sorties in the T-6 and T-38 aircraft are limited to a maximum flight duty period of 10 hours when any portion of the training will occur at night. Flight duty period begins when an aircrew member reports for a mission, briefing, or other official duty and ends at engine shutdown after the final flight of the day. T-6 and T-38 undergraduate pilot training instructors will not fly a night checkout sortie or night syllabus sortie as the third flight-related activity of the duty day. According to the 11-202 Vol 3, each crew member must have an operable flashlight for night operations. Additionally, 11-2T-T6 Volume 3 specifies a clear visor will be worn at night or when needed for restricted visibility. It is estimated that once fully adapted to darkness, which takes roughly 30 minutes, the rods in the eye are 10,000 times more sensitive to light than the cones, making them the primary receptors for night vision. Since the cones are concentrated near the fovea, the rods are also responsible for much of peripheral vision. The concentration of cones in the fovea can make a night blind spot in the center of the field of vision. To see an object clearly at night, the pilot must expose the rods to the image. This can be done by looking 5 to 10 degrees off center of the object to be seen. Along with the loss of acuity and color at night, depth perception and judgment of size may be lost. The 11-2T6 Vol 3 specifies the landing and taxi lights will normally be used during all night taxiing. The exception is taxiing aircraft may extinguish their landing and taxi lights when their lights might interfere with the vision of another pilot landing or taking off. Taxiing aircraft will come to a stop if the area cannot be visually cleared without the landing and taxi lights. If desired, aircrews may turn off anti-collision lights during the hours of darkness while in their home-based traffic pattern. Additionally, during any adverse meteorological conditions, the pilot in command may turn off their anti-collision lights should the flashing constitute a hazard to safety. As described in the Aeronautical Information Manual, the FAA created a voluntary pilot safety program called Operation Lights On, designed to enhance the see and avoid concept. Pilots are encouraged to turn on their landing lights after takeoff clearance has been received or when beginning takeoff roll. While not a feasible option in the T-6, pilots are further encouraged to turn on their landing lights when operating below 10,000 feet, day or night, especially when operating within 10 miles of any airport. In the T-6, the navigation lights will be on anytime the engine is running. The landing, taxi, and strobe lights are used as required so as to not blind ground personnel and other pilots. It only takes a fraction of a second to ruin night vision with a bright light, and roughly 30 minutes to fully adapt to night vision. If you know you are about to be exposed to a bright light, close one eye to preserve your night vision in one eye. From taxiing clear of the runway to parking the aircraft, lighting is used to illuminate your path without blinding others. Spatial disorientation, often called spatial D for short, refers to the lack of orientation with regard to the position, attitude, or movement of the aircraft in space. The vestibular, somatosensory, and visual systems work together to ascertain orientation and movement in space. Most of the time, the streams of information from these three systems agree, but sometimes flying can cause these systems to supply conflicting information to the brain, which can lead to disorientation. During flight in VMC, the eyes are the major orientation source and usually prevail over false sensations from other sensory systems. When these visual cues are removed, as they are in IMC, false sensations can cause a pilot to quickly become disoriented. There are three types of spatial disorientation. Type 1, or unrecognized, is where a pilot gets disoriented but does not recognize it, in turn leading to incorrect or inadequate decisions. Type 2, or recognized, is where the pilot knows he or she is disoriented and takes corrective action. Type 3, or incapacitating spatial D, is where the pilot knows that he or she is disoriented but is incapacitated and thus fails to take any corrective action. This incapacitation can be psychological, physiological, or physical in nature. The FAA produced Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, available for free download at faa.gov, lists 6 of the most common vestibular illusions experienced among pilots. In the T-6, 3 of these illusions, those highlighted in red, are demonstrated by an instructor pilot as part of the Spatial D SSR. The Spatial D demonstration is described in Chapter 7 of the 11248. The leans is the most common illusion during flight and is caused by a sudden return to level flight following a gradual and prolonged turn that went unnoticed by the pilot. The reason a pilot may be unaware of such a gradual turn is that human exposure to a rotational acceleration of 2 degrees per second or lower is below the detection threshold of the semicircular canals. Leveling the wings after such a turn may cause an illusion that the aircraft is banking in the opposite direction. In response to such an illusion, a pilot may lean in the direction of the original turn in a corrective attempt to regain the perception of a correct vertical posture. The Coriolis illusion occurs when a pilot has been in a turn long enough for the fluid in the ear canal to move at the same speed as the canal. A movement of the head in a different plane, such as looking at something in a different part of the cockpit, may set the fluid moving, creating the illusion of turning or accelerating on an entirely different axis. This action causes the pilot to think the aircraft is performing a maneuver it is not. The disoriented pilot may maneuver the aircraft into a dangerous attitude in an attempt to correct the aircraft's perceived attitude. For this reason, it is important that pilots develop an instrument cross-check or scan that involves minimal head movement. Take care when retrieving charts or other objects in the cockpit. If something is dropped, retrieve it with minimal head movement and be alert for the Coriolis illusion. An abrupt upward vertical acceleration, as can occur in an updraft, can stimulate the otolith organs to create an illusion of being in a climb. This is known as elevator illusion. The disoriented pilot may push the aircraft into a nose-low attitude. An abrupt downward vertical acceleration, usually in a downdraft, has the opposite effect with the disoriented pilot pulling the aircraft into a nose-up attitude. A rapid acceleration, such as experienced during takeoff, stimulates the otolith organs in the same way as tilting the head backwards. This action may create what is known as the somatogravic illusion of being in a nose-up attitude, especially in conditions with poor visual references. The disoriented pilot may push the aircraft into a nose-low or dive attitude. A rapid deceleration by quick reduction of power may have the opposite effect, with the disoriented pilot pulling the aircraft into a nose-up or stall attitude. An abrupt change from climb to straight level flight can stimulate the otolith organs enough to create the illusion of tumbling backwards, known as inversion illusion. The disoriented pilot may push the aircraft abruptly into a nose-low attitude, which may intensify this illusion. As with other illusions, a pilot in a prolonged, coordinated, constant rate turn may experience the illusion of not turning. During the recovery to level flight, the pilot will then experience the sensation of turning in the opposite direction, causing the disoriented pilot to return the aircraft to its original turn. The absence of any sensation of turning creates the illusion of being in a level descent. The pilot may pull back on the controls in an attempt to climb or stop the descent. This action tightens the spiral and increases the loss of altitude. This illusion is referred to as a graveyard spiral. This may lead to a loss of aircraft control. There are several ways to prevent spatial disorientation. The primary means being through instrument training and awareness. The 11217 Vol 1 cautions pilots that descent gradients in excess of 10 degrees in IMC may induce spatial disorientation. Additionally, if clouds are layered, use caution not to trust outside visual cues, as a high possibility of spatial disorientation exists. The 11248 advises that while flying in IMC, banks should be limited to 30 degrees and pitch to 10 degrees nose low and 15 degrees nose high. Flying in IMC or at night, believe your aircraft instruments and continually monitor them. Avoid rapid head movements and keep cockpit lighting at the lowest practical level. If you find yourself spatially D'd and flying with another pilot, confess the issue to that person and have the other pilot fly the aircraft. If solo, make frequent reference to the attitude indicator and concentrate solely on flying basic instruments. Maintain straight and level if symptoms do not improve immediately. The 11217 Vol 1 and 11248 explain what to do in the event of an inadvertent unusual attitude. If you find yourself spatially D'd, it is important to take immediate corrective action. The technique from the 11248 is recognize the unusual attitude with the ADI and aircraft performance, confirm actual attitude with the standby ADI and performance instruments, and recover using the appropriate procedure. In the T-6, if the aircraft is diving, roll towards wings level and start a pull-up when bank is less than 90 degrees. Reduce power and extend the speed brake if required. If the aircraft is climbing, use power as required to maintain desired airspeed. As the fuselage dot of the miniature aircraft approaches the horizon bar, adjust bank to establish a wings level attitude. If airspeed is low, the nose may continue below the horizon. Only use as much bank as required to recover. It is not necessary to use 90 degrees in all recoveries. If aircraft cannot be controlled and unable to recover by 6,000 feet AGL, eject. Of the senses, vision is the most important for safe flight. However, various terrain features and atmospheric conditions can create optical illusions. These illusions are primarily associated with landing. Pilots are susceptible to visual illusions during the transition to landing following an instrument approach. Here, pilots must transition from reliance on instruments to visual cues outside of the aircraft. It is imperative pilots be aware of the potential problems associated with these illusions and take appropriate corrective action. To prevent these illusions and their potentially hazardous consequences, pilots can anticipate the possibility of visual illusions during approaches to unfamiliar airports, particularly at night or in adverse weather conditions. Consult airport diagrams for information on runway slope, terrain, and lighting. Make frequent reference to the altimeter. Use VASI and PAPI systems for a visual reference, or an electronic glide slope whenever they are available. Use the VDP found on many non-precision instrument approach procedure charts. Use extra caution when the approach is over water, in unlit field, or snow-covered terrain. An absence of surrounding ground features can create an illusion that the aircraft is at a higher altitude than it actually is. This so-called black hole illusion causes pilots to fly a lower approach than is desired. Lighting has powerful effects on distance judgment at night. If it looks brighter, it looks closer. This can result in a number of problems. A dark runway surrounded by lights can seem farther away than it actually is, leading to a hard landing. Lights along a straight path, such as a road, can be mistaken for runway and approach lights. Bright runway and approach lighting systems, especially where few lights illuminate the surrounding terrain, may create the illusion of less distance to the runway. The pilot who does not recognize this illusion will often fly a higher approach. A narrower than usual runway can create an illusion that the aircraft is at a higher altitude than it actually is, especially when runway length to width relationships are comparable. The pilot who does not recognize this illusion will fly a lower approach, with the risk of striking objects along the approach path or landing short. A wider than usual runway can have the opposite effect, with the risk of the pilot leveling out the aircraft high and landing hard or overshooting the runway. An upsloping runway, upsloping terrain, or both can create an illusion that the aircraft is at a higher altitude than it actually is. The pilot who does not recognize this illusion will fly a lower approach. Downsloping runways and downsloping approach terrain can have the opposite effect. The 11.2 T-6 Vol 3 and 11.202 Vol 3 list a number of night requirements and restrictions that must be adhered to. Fly U.S. Air Force fixed-wing aircraft under IFR to the maximum extent practical. Pilots shall fly IFR if operating fixed-wing aircraft at night, unless the mission cannot be flown under IFR. Night landings at other than home field require operational glide path guidance. Do not file to a base of intended landing other than home station unless there is an operable straight-in approach with glide path guidance. Night alternates have this same requirement. VASIs, PAPIs, and ILS approaches constitute acceptable glide path guidance. Unless otherwise required by a formal syllabus or current year training requirements, the preferred night instrument approach procedures in order of precedence for fixed-wing aircraft are as follows: precision approach, non-precision approach, VFR straight-in, and VFR rectangular pattern. At towered fields, aircrew are allowed under IFR to receive vectors for visual approaches to increase the frequency and repetition of night landings. When available, monitor the glide slope with the PAPI or VASI during visual approaches and the ILS glide slope during instrument approaches. At airfields other than the home field, descents below an MDA on a non-precision approach require glide path guidance. However, aircrews may perform practice approaches at facilities with no glide path guidance if they descend no lower than the published MDA. Do not practice the visual circling maneuver portion of an instrument approach or perform a low closed pattern at night. Fly night overhead patterns only at the home station. The required runway spacing at night is 6,000 feet, similar or dissimilar. In unusual circumstances, such as an aircraft emergency or a facility outage, the pilot in command will determine the best method of recovery, which may or may not include guide path guidance. In the T-6, the following is prohibited at night: aerobatics, practice spins and stalls, stability demonstration, practice contact recoveries, practice emergency landing patterns, practice flaps up patterns and landings, student pilot solo flight, and formation flight. There are many good reasons to fly at night, one being it offers a tactical advantage over many adversaries of the United States. Pilots must keep in mind, however, that the risks of night flying are different than during the day and oftentimes higher. Pilots who are cautious and educated on night flying techniques can mitigate those risks and become comfortable and proficient in the task of night flying.